Hello everyone and welcome to the channel, and today I will be doing a pacifist only run in Borderlands 4. What this means is, I'm not allowed to do any direct damage to enemies full stop. This means no guns, no melee, no grenades, no ordnance, etc. The only exception to this is the Locust barrels that are provided in Locust boss fights, which are used to make the enemies vulnerable to damage. I am also aiming to do this with as little side content as possible to make it more difficult, and to prove that you can beat the game at a lower level. Now, this run was quite fun, but also quite tedious at times. One enemy literally took a whole hour before I beat him. I also want to point out that I am playing on easy difficulty, as otherwise the late game would be way too tedious. So, you might be wondering, how is this run even possible? Well, that's where Vex comes in. One of her abilities allows you to summon phase clones, which are basically just mimic tears from Elden Ring. There are two types of phase clones: Reapers, who move around and do melee damage with a big scythe, and Spectres, who shoot at enemies with an AR. Both are useful, but in this run we will almost entirely be using Spectres. You may be wondering how the prologue is possible in this run, since at points Arjay runs off and you have to kill enemies by yourself. Fortunately, the devs added a skip prologue option in the game, so yeah, we're skipping it. After waking up on the beach somewhere, we are already level 2, so we invest our points into the 4th seal skill tree and finally get some summons going. Claptrap recruits us into the Crimson Resistance and also says to like the video and subscribe. Not sure what that's got to do with the Resistance, but whatever. We head up to the first Ripper camp to test out the damage, and honestly, it's not that bad. It can get a bit tedious though, because the summons are only out for a limited time, and then I have to wait for them to recharge. Fortunately, there are a few things we can get to reduce the cooldown time. One of these is the Accelerator Rep Kit, which I'm going to be keeping an eye out for. We fight our way through, or rather, the summons fight their way through, all the way to the first boss, Splash Zone. Being the first boss, he's not particularly difficult, and I even found this cheese spot on a roof where I can summon from and not get damaged. Overall, this boss took about a minute and a half, which is the shortest boss of the entire run. After the first boss fight, we get to the first safe house, which luckily does not get us any XP. This is good news, because as I explained earlier, we're trying to beat the game at a minimum level, and this means we can get the fast travel points provided by the safe houses without it affecting our level. Anyway, Claptrap does a transmission, and we get a bunch of new recruits for the Crimson Resistance. I also, on my way to the first location, find my first elemental gun at a vending machine. This allows Vex to attune her abilities to the element of the gun, which will come in handy for some bosses. Vex also has a lot of elemental-oriented abilities, so this may get overpowered. We then continue the story and save the Outlanders. This leads to a short and easy fight, and we are rewarded with the Digirunner for our troubles. This will let us run past enemies even faster, so very useful for this run. I also realise that Vex isn't dripped out yet, so I go to the menus and give her a better outfit.
Glum dog, how much bling is too much bling?
One can never have too much bling, sir.
Bling indeed.
That's much better. The next boss in the story is Horace, who also isn't particularly difficult, but has higher damage output than anything we have fought so far. This fight highlights one of the biggest weaknesses of Vex's summons, which is their low health. To avoid them dying constantly, I am forced to wait and summon the clones in sets of 2 or 3 to allow them to do more damage, as the boss can attack one, but not both, which allows them to be more effective together. The Horace fight takes us 6 minutes overall, which is quite a bit longer than Splash Zone did, but still, a win is a win. We meet up with Zadra, but she gets kidnapped, so we have to go and rescue her. The compound where she's being held has some very high level enemies. I can't even see what level they are, so it's at least 5 levels above where we are now. This also takes us about 40 minutes to get through. We also get our first augment, which causes the summons to do a big attack for a lot of damage when they're summoned and whenever they reload, which is a pretty nice DPS boost. Anyway, we get to the next boss, the Oppressor. This boss also isn't too bad, but takes us around 8 minutes to beat. Most bosses after this point will take longer than this, so if you're attempting this run yourself, be warned. We continue the story and find out about Locust, which is kind of two different things. There's Locust Serum that can dissolve literally anything, and there's Locust Armour, which is impervious to damage. Some enemies use this armour, and so you have to throw the Locust Serum at them to dissolve it so you can damage them. Speaking of which, the next boss is the Bio Bulkhead, who has Locust Armour. This boss is mandatory, so that's why we have the exception for the Locust Barrels. Outside of the Locust stuff, this boss's health bar is entirely armour. This means our summons can shoot entirely corrosive damage for the whole fight and do big numbers. All in all, this boss took us around 9 minutes. Then we find the ship above the base, which is carrying a lot of Locust stuff. It flies off in the direction of our homies, so we chase after it. Zadra hacks its tractor beam so then we can hijack the ship, and we destroy some critical terminals and batteries to crash it. We also find an accelerator rep kit, which was mentioned earlier, and temporarily boosts our skill cooldown rate, so very useful for getting the summons back out. The next thing in the story, and the last thing to do in the FadeFields, is to fight the Overseer boss, Idolator Sol. Again, this boss isn't too difficult. He does have this mechanic where he has parts of Locust armour that break off separately, and then you can only deal damage in the spot where you broke off the armour. This means we need to focus on angling the boss and the summons in a specific way so that they can damage him. Fortunately, this isn't as difficult as it sounds, and he goes down in about 11 minutes. With that, we have completed the first area of the story, and are now moving on to Carcadia Burn. Here, we find two returning characters, Zane from Borderlands 3 and Mad Moxie, both of whom are running a bar, mostly run by Zane's digiclones. We are tasked with fighting off some Rippers, so we go and do that with Zane and his pet Thresher. Several exploded catapults later, we meet up with the Electi, and specifically Levain. In order to stop the Rippers, we need to get a password from multiple parts. This quest also has really high level scaling. The enemies are always higher level than you, no matter what level you are, and because I'm so low level, the effect is even worse. There's also weird jumps, like after this the enemy levels go back to normal, and then at other points they jump back up again. It's very inconsistent. Anyway, I give this guy the password, and bonk him with my squad of summons. We run through this base and get to the next boss, Drill a Hole. I find a safe spot in this fight, so it's not too difficult, but he also has a lot of health. So it takes about 14 minutes overall, making it the longest boss fight so far. It's also worth pointing out that he's level 20 and I'm only level 13. We head deeper into the base to rescue Quent, and we also pick up a gun that shoots out portable shields, which is going to be very useful for not getting shot. We then launch ourselves over a gap into a crater. The enemies here are insanely overleveled, and while it's definitely possible to fight them now, it'd be easier to come back later. Fortunately, this game is a bit non-linear, so we can go and do another area instead, Terminus Range. When we get there, we meet a cool little dude called Defiant Calder. We help him out and also fight another boss, the Flying Cratch. This is probably the most annoying boss in the whole game, even if you aren't doing a goofy challenge run like this. Basically, he shoots out projectiles that can easily one-shot you, but also can be shot at and destroyed to resurrect you in Fight for Your Life. So the fight usually plays out with a lot of back and forth between getting one shot, getting back up, getting one shot again, and repeat. This boss also takes us 14 minutes to beat, so it's about on par with Drill a Hole. We then meet another two returning Borderlands 3 characters, Amara the Siren and Hermes, who is Ava's pet something. Amara takes us to this abandoned Order research outpost, and we fight another boss, the Vile Prototype. Vile enemies are another type of gimmick enemy, a bit like Locust enemies. They basically have these crystals on them, and an extra health bar made out of crystal. When you shoot a crystal, it detaches from them, flies around the room for about a minute or so, then reattaches. You have to get all the crystals detached from the enemy to clear the crystal health bar to actually do damage, but when the crystals reattach, the crystal health bar comes back. This means that Vile enemies have only a short window in which you can actually damage them, which is not great for this run. This can also be frustrating because the summons can't attack the flying orbs, so this extends the fight by quite a bit. Fortunately, we have Amara and Hermes here to help us, so it's not too bad. This boss takes 11 minutes overall, and fun fact, it was 8 levels above where we are currently. Next up, we have to fight our way through the facility of Vile Lictor, the main boss of this area. The run up to this base also has some really overleveled enemies, but they're easier to run past here. When we get inside the base proper, the enemies go back to normal scaling, so yeah, no idea what's going on there. In the base, we have to fight 2 Vile enemies at once, not bosses, just normal enemies, which in itself takes 10 minutes for the reasons I explained a minute ago. With the Vile enemies defeated, we go to confront Vile Lictor, and Amara joins the cool robotic limb gang. Vile Lictor is, aesthetically, a very cool and interesting boss, but in this run he's actually quite easy. This is mostly because, despite the name, he's not actually a Vile enemy. He only takes about 6 minutes to kill, and with that we're done with the Terminus range storyline. Next, we return to Carcadia Burn to finally confront the overleveled enemies. They're not as bad as they were before though, so I push through. However, the next mini-boss we come across is the bane of my existence. Mudmouth usually isn't too bad in a standard run, but he can spawn with some really bad modifiers. This led to me dying a few times, so instead I opted to quit and reload the game to reroll these modifiers. I had to do this a few times before I got a decent roll and decided to fight him again. I managed to finally beat him, and overall the whole ordeal took about an hour. This is by far the longest time I spent on a single enemy in this entire run, and again, he's not even a boss enemy, just a mini-boss. Anyway, we're on the up after this bit. The enemies immediately following Mudmouth were scaled to my level, which was a nice relief, but also a bit of a kick in the teeth. But whatever. The next boss is Calais, the Ripper Queen, and she was a pretty average fight, and she was also scaled properly. She took about 8 minutes overall, and it wasn't a problem due to easy to dodge attacks. With that, the storyline of Carcadia Burn is technically over, but we have to return to the Mudmouth area to take an elevator to the moon. This area is still really high scaled, annoyingly, but we push through it. We fight some normally scaled enemies on the lift, and Arjay shows up, though we didn't do the prologue, so we actually have no idea who this is. Zane boots him off the edge, and we make it up to the moon of Elpis. If you play Borderlands the pre-sequel, you'll probably recognise a lot of the stuff here, because the first few hours of that game also take place on Elpis. I'm a big fan of that game, so this segment was very nostalgic for me. Anyway, Calais is somehow still alive and jump scares us out of our nostalgia, so we jump her with our summons. The second fight is actually much easier than the first and only takes 4 minutes, about half as much time. With Calais dead, again, the route to the City of Dominion is open. Of course, the enemies here are overleveled, so we run through them as best as we can. We steal an Ordnite canister to distract this big laser, but it doesn't work, so Zadra teleports us out. However, this is a part of the Timekeeper's plan, and we get mind-controlled and kill Zadra. Before the Timekeeper can turn our gun on us, however, we use the indomitable human spirit to break free. We do still get jumped by a gang of Order soldiers though. We escape and head up the tower to confront the Timekeeper and his big bald head. There are a fair few overleveled enemies on the way, but the enemies scale back to normal once inside the tower. I have truly no idea why the scaling is like that in this game, but it works better for this run as most of the enemies we actually have to kill are way easier. We fight our way through and, nearing the top, fight a couple of tanks. They aren't that difficult and we finally make it to the Timekeeper. Now, this boss has two phases. The first phase is considered to be the easier one and takes us about 4 minutes overall. The second and harder phase takes quite a bit longer, clocking in at just over 12 minutes. So that's a combined time of 16 minutes, which is the longest we've spent on a boss this whole run. Except for Mudmouth. I hate Mudmouth so much. Anyway, we open the vault and fight the real final boss, which is Arjay. He's pretty easy and our summons have become quite overpowered, so the fight only takes about 4 minutes. With Arjay and the Timekeeper defeated, we open up the vault and take the loot inside. Unfortunately, the only even remotely rare bit of loot here is a single purple, and everything else is either green or blue rarity. This is quite disappointing as this is literally what you get for beating the whole game. Anyway, we finished the run at level 23, which is honestly pretty low, and I'm sure you could get it even lower than this. I guess that has answered the question of can you beat Borderlands 4 Pacifist only. The answer is yes, but it's quite a bit of pain. Thank you all for watching up until the end. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and if you got this far, please comment what your favourite Vault Hunter is from any of the games. And with that, I will say, good looting, Vault Hunter.